Good evening, folks, and welcome to the official Oscarinas coverage for King Arthur's World. King Arthur's World is a real-time strategy game for the Super Nintendo system. Put out in 1993 by Argonaut Software, King Arthur's World follows the rise to power of the titular King Arthur as not only a warrior, but as a tactician and general of brave knights, skilled engineers, and powerful wizards. My name is Tomm. I'll be your host for tonight, and I'm joined by the Academy Chair, Mitch. Hi, Mitch.
Hello. It's weird being on the opposite side of that. I feel like anytime it's an episode, I'm reading that prologue.
Yeah, so, it's weird being on this side of it as well, but hey, welcome. Welcome to talking about King Arthur's World.
Well, sounds good. I am excited to hear your expanded thoughts on this one because this is a game that I think a number of us were sort of like, not heard of this choice. It's a bit under the radar and underrepresented, so it'll be really cool to have it get some attention that's, I think, been long overdue.
Yeah. So based on, I think, my I guess, advocating for it alone, we've nominated King Arthur's World for the best level design, best gameplay of challenge and achievement, and the best music track forward march. So I think I'll just start by talking about the level design, and then we can kind of have some thoughts as we go.
Sounds good.
So levels in King Arthur's World start out pretty simple. They're kind of more tutorials teaching you how to use each unit, and they really follow the same sort of formula of, here's King Arthur, he starts at a tent, your goal is to get him to a treasure chest, and then you'll see like an image flash of him drinking with his knights because you successfully got some treasure.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And like the goal is always kind of going to be the same. It's get King Arthur from that tent to that treasure chest. And as long as you do that, as long as King Arthur doesn't die, everyone else is expendable, and more just a tool in your arsenal to use to get King Arthur to that treasure chest.
This sounds imperialistic. I'm sorry.
It is. No one else remembers the knights' names. It's all about King Arthur in this world. It's King Arthur's World.
Getting drunk.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'll shut up now.
No, you're good. But this does get this level format does get kind of complicated. So it starts off, you're kind of just walking through like pretty even terrain as you're getting peppered by like enemy archers or warriors, and you'll learn how to use some of the basic units, and then you'll start to find terrain that has like traps or walls you got to bust down, or gaps in the world that you have to fill in and like support your builders while they're being assailed by enemy archers or something like that. After the tutorial world and after like those initial levels, you make it to these stranger biome spaces that are, I think, the first one's in like a bunch of caves that are connected by some pretty ludicrous traps, and then eventually you make it all the way up to a sky world where you're in the sky and you have to just worry about your kind of Lemming-esque soldiers just falling off the edge and disappearing into nothing, and King Arthur falling off the edge and disappearing into nothing. So one of the kind of tricky things about the level design is so much of the challenge is not only in navigating these levels, but making sure that you're timing your unit's movement correctly. You'll find that there's elevators that you have to try and get everyone on at once, and if you don't get everyone on at the right time, you're going to get slaughtered when they get to the top. Or you'll find that like there's certain moves in the game that are very powerful, but can totally backfire on you if you mistime them. And there's just like a very small amount of RNG in the enemy units to kind of keep the game interesting. The same strategy is not always going to work the same way, basically. On top of that, levels sort of build on top of each other. Often a level is trying to teach you how to do something that will be required and end up being a surprise tool that you can use later in the world or later in the next world. Each level's aim is kind of to get you to this point of like, oh, I understand how this unit works. I understand how this interaction between these elements works. And when you do get that, oftentimes it will lead to you getting King Arthur all the way over from that tent for him to slowly kind of regally walk over to his treasure chest without taking too many hits and dying.
That must be such a satisfying feeling, because it seems like you would put all your ducks in place, you orchestrate the pathway forward, and then you just give Arthur the command, and you sit back and watch your handiwork play out. That's really cool.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about this game, I know this uses the Super Nintendo mouse as well, and I've heard that like that makes this game a little bit more easier to parse control-wise. I didn't do that. I just played with the Super Nintendo controller when I played this game. And in that, like for King Arthur and for I think your knights as well, you have basically two commands, which is go right or go left. And so oftentimes, like, you will hang King Arthur back, but King Arthur can take a couple hits, and he can defend a little bit as well. So there's going to be times when you're just like, he needs to be fighting on the front, even though it's a little bit risky, because you're just a little bit not like evenly matched, and you need to make sure that things go your way. And there's a lot of like little kind of pieces. Like a lot of the challenge is really just kind of keeping track of these different, I guess, like platoons of troops that are going in different ways. Like, I think that really is like kind of where the best that sort of challenge and achievement comes into play. Like you will have, especially in the later levels, you'll have a place like where you can set archers up on a ridge. And like with archers, besides moving them just left or right, you can kind of set the angle with which they're knocking their arrows. So you can have them shoot more close up if there's a bunch of guys coming straight at you, or if there's guys like sitting in a tower, you can have them kind of arc it over the tower or over the wall to try and knock those guys out from afar. So you can get them set up in a position that will have them peppering units off as they kind of come towards you. Then you can lead an assault with your knights and King Arthur to try and get to the treasure. And then you have like your other units these are like the two most basic units are your archers, your knight, and your knights. Then you have things like barrelmen they have explosive barrels, which is really good for clearing out obstacles, but if they get hit, they'll just explode. And fire spreads like crazy in this game as well, so you'll end up like exploding a barrelman accidentally, and suddenly like your entire place is on fire, and you're just frantically like, oh god, get Arthur out of there, nothing else matters. And then like the other like kind of core piece, I think there's 8 units in the game, but the other like kind of core unit is your engineers, which will give you the ability to construct anything from platforms to get over gaps, or get up ledges, battering rams to break down doors, or catapults to like do large scale assaults. And these guys they're necessary for so many different things. I think they also like will let you can make new tents so you can rally your troops closer to where the fight's gonna be happening. I don't really remember doing that too much, but you can do it, and I think you definitely need to in the later levels.
Do you have a limited supply of troops, or how does that work?
Yeah, I believe you have 4 slots, so you can only have 4 different companies active at once.
Okay.
You can't just swarm people with night after night after night after night.
Right.
After a certain point, you'll only have, I think there's 5 units per troop, and so the most you can really have on the board is Arthur and 20 knights, basically, or Arthur and 10 knights and 10 archers. And then what if you need to get an engineer corps out to go and make a platform? So managing those troops ends up being a little bit trickier.
Gotcha.
And then also there's wizards, which I feel like I have to bring them up, even though they're kind of insane. There's 2 different types of wizards as well. There's the sort of damage offensive wizards, and then the defensive healing wizards. And like the Healy wizards, basically they'll just kind of do your buffs. They'll give you health, they'll heal. This is usually you'll use them to like heal King Arthur to make sure that like he doesn't die, because again, if he dies, the game's over. Or give strength to a bunch of different knights or whatever to make sure that they can clear out a group of enemies without like taking too many casualties. And then they also have an invincibility spell. Like both sets of wizards have crazy powerful spells. So it's a very short spell. And it doesn't make them immune to, I think it doesn't make them immune to like falling off of the world and like the sky levels.
Right.
But it's a really good way to like just set up some like shieldmen or knights or whatever on the outside of a camp while you're trying to establish a foothold in a new place. I think that's a pretty limited one as well. I think the spells are pretty limited. And then the offensive wizards have basics like fireballs that will just shoot a fireball straight forward and take out anyone in its path. Then they have other things like lightning that just summons down a lightning storm like in an area. And they
That's
even have like
awesome.
an apocalypse spell that just kills every enemy on the same screen, on like the screen when you cast it.
Sheesh.
Which is great. It's really good. Like the magic powers are really good, but they also just are. The wizards are so squishy and will die to like a single stray arrow, and you only get the one of them when you summon them. So
Okay. And the others
yeah,
get summoned in groups.
yeah,
It's an
and like so the
interesting way
real
to
challenge of
separate
this
them.
game
Hmm.
is to kind of figure out with all the tools you have at your disposal. Here's the world with a very clear objective. There's my treasure chest. You can kind of freely scroll throughout the world, and here's King Arthur. How do I get this moving, regal little king all the way over there without getting him killed? And yeah, each level is just a very kind of satisfying puzzle to complete. Some of the earlier ones do feel a little bit simple upon going back and playing them again, but the later ones are intense. Oh,
Yeah,
and
I
the
mean,
other thing I should have mentioned about this, the game uses a password system, so that if you don't have like a save file, but you can record like different passwords. It's like I think it's like a 4x4 or 5x5 grid. You just punch out certain ones, and it will take you to that level.
mm,
So, in going back to play it today, I could, for instance, just start at the Sky World if I wanted to have a challenge and not have to replay through all the tutorial world again.
yeah, I've become a fan of password systems ever since last season with Arcus Odyssey because while I
Mhm.
was trying to capture footage, it was actually really nice to just go and implement a password system to get to a specific level so I didn't have to play through the whole game again. That's something that I kind of want to see make a comeback. I know it sounds silly because we have save systems. You know, why do you need a password? Because all of those passwords are just going to be posted online anyways.
Yeah.
But I also just feel that, you know, you could plow through a game on the easiest difficulty with relative ease as well. So it's not really that big of an issue. Obviously, it wouldn't work for certain games. Like, yeah, it's not going to suit like a big blockbuster that's super long, like an open world
Yeah.
type of thing. But there's lots of other games that I think would benefit from having a system that allows the player to manually go to where they want to go and just play that stage. I mean, a stage select screen would also be a similar kind of equivalent, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the password system because it does give you like it gives you a sense of like, do I want to if I want to, I can just go find the password online. That's okay. It gives me access to doing that. But it also
Hmm.
like says, hey, you have to actually try to do that. If you don't want to try to do that, here's your routine way to do it. And like honestly, it's pretty easy to like make a 5x5 grid in my notebook. I did this all the time when I was playing it. And be like, all right, here's the X's for whatever level I'm on now, or ooh, I really like that level. I'm going to copy down the password for that one,
Hmm.
so I can do it again later. Yeah, that's pretty much the end of my notes. Like it's a very the gameplay itself is very satisfying, and it's very hard to kind of convey that feeling of going back and like setting up the perfect plan into motion, starting Arthur on his very long journey from one place to the other, knowing that you have to get the timing right of all these different pieces to get him there.
So
Um,
yeah, actually, I had a question in there.
yeah,
Is it possible to destroy all the enemies, clean a path, and then tell Arthur to go, or is it more that the enemies will continuously respawn, and so even though the path develops, you need to carry Arthur with you while you're being bombarded by enemies and such? Or does it depend on the stage?
I think it depends on the stage. I know in some of the
Okay,
earlier levels you can just clear out
that makes
all the
sense.
enemies and just have Arthur walk. That's something you can do. Definitely in the later levels, it becomes a thing where some of the places where units can spawn from are out of reach, or there's a guy in
Okay.
a tower that you're never going to be able to shoot. That's just going to kind of constantly be like throwing down an arrow at you or loading a catapult to shoot at you. So you just got to get that timing
Hmm.
right, and have your wizard that casts invincibility on Arthur ready to go.
Huh. Okay, that makes sense to me. That goes back to what you were saying earlier of making sure the player has a very soft opening so they
Yeah.
can, you know, take their time, build out the path, and then as stages go on, that will no longer become an option, but that makes for a good rise up in difficulty.
Yeah, I guess I'd kind of describe it like building a Rube Goldberg machine, where like the first few levels teach you like this is how dominoes work, or this is how like you can get a marble to go from one place to the other.
Oh, okay.
Then the
Huh.
later levels start to be like, all right, now assemble your weird Rube Goldberg machine. The goal is still the same. The goal is still get this slow-moving guy. That's one of my actually frustrations with the game, and I've seen this a lot in doing some research for this video as well. Arthur moves so slow, and sometimes you solve the thing, and like you just have to watch him slowly. I actually kind of love this though. You have to watch him slowly saunter across the map, uh, and it's kind of stressful because you know the plan works.
Yes.
But there's just enough randomness that you still have some of that tension. You're like, that arrow could hit me. It hasn't hit me the last 4 times, but it could hit me. Which is like it's satisfying, but I think with the slow moving nature of the game can also be frustrating. So
I kind of think that's great, though. It just adds more to this narrative archetype of Arthur being somewhat of a... I mean, he's very kingly. He doesn't want to do things directly. He's, yes, plebeians, pave the way for me. I will now saunter over to get my beer.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like, I feel like misunderstanding the altruistic nature of King Arthur the legend, but honestly, I feel like king, so...
Well, this is King Arthur's world. This is King Arthur's imagination of what he would have preferred everything be in history.
Everyone just lined up perfectly. I could walk very simply from my camp to my treasure chest. Yeah.
It's like his dream when the frustrations of what he actually had to deal with finally come to rest, and he goes, man, it would have been a lot easier like this.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah.
So I'm getting us too much into the meta territory as well, though. But this is fascinating stuff. It's really cool to see a game take the premise of Lemmings and actually build something new with it. That's, I think, the part that's immediately striking about the game. But they do a great job of disguising it, I'll say, because it's not a straight-up Lemmings clone. Like, it really is innovating on every aspect of that Lemmings had. And I think King Arthur, or using knights and troops, was a good choice to complement that.
No, I agree, and I think like I played King Arthur's World first when I was younger, and then going and trying to play Lemmings afterwards. I think I was a little
spoiled.
I kind of like I was a little spoiled by King Arthur's World as like this like, well, wait, your guys just kind of stand there and they literally just die. That's their point. The point of Lemmings is just to die. But I can protect them, right? I can do something to sort of hedge these bets. No, not really.
Yeah, that's partly why I had a hard time with Lemmings, because it felt very, very limited. And it is a puzzle, but it's also so much more, it's like compressed. Like the puzzles don't go on for very long, and so it kind of, I don't know, the interest fizzles out very quickly for me with that one.
Yeah. That's pretty much it with the gameplay and level design. I just wanted to highlight the sort of toolboxy nature of it. And I think the level design is fantastic. Or I remember the level design being fantastic. Full disclosure, I could not get my Super Nintendo to work to replay this game in preparation, but I know that there are... I did scrub through some YouTube footage of this game, and I did get to see some of the later levels where you are running around kind of like a crazy person. And like, of course, these are YouTubers that have kind of solved the level in advance. But you still can see some of like the strange, like, corkboard-esque, the string is over here, the plan is this, and then we have this, and then, and it's really fun to kind of see, like, the way you can solve these puzzles. There's usually kind of, like, one way it wants you to solve it, but you have a little bit more agency and more flexibility within that to solve it in your own way.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you have different combat units, for instance, and so you might be able to leverage them in unique ways. I also saw when I was going through the footage as well, where you'd have the shield units and they could deflect attacks that would then bounce back and take out enemies. And I thought that was a really cool addition as well. So there's definitely cool ways you can use your units that aren't just the prescribed intentional way to use them, which is important because it just makes the game... I mean, it really gets into the good flavor of it because, like you said, you've got a limited squad overall. So when you're in the heat of it and you're trying to keep things moving forward, you're eventually going to have to lean on a unit that's maybe not ideal for this situation. And that's always fantastic. It's one thing that I think has bothered me a little bit about Pokemon games, in the sense that it's almost always the intention is to lean very heavily on the unit that has the type advantage. There was
Yeah.
a follow-up game called Coromon that I've been enjoying, where they actually punish that really hard, and they give different units at least 1 or 2 moves that specifically counters what they are weak against, and so you're encouraged to stay in the fight and not just swap out. So anyways, I don't want to take us off on an example that does not quite fit the bill, but I'm just trying to think of something that puts you in that position where, yes, there is a guided focus to the game, but you give that player just a little bit of wiggle room, and then that encourages a lot of creativity.
Yeah.
It's strange how much you can get, like how much value you can get out of doing that.
No, it is like, and like I think that's why I highlight that little bit of randomness in like the enemy movement as well, because it does
Right.
ramp up the tension of this worked the last couple times to get through this little part, and then I lost later or whatever. But this time is it gonna work? Right.
Yeah. Well, and it also has one other nomination for Best Music Track. Did you have some extended thoughts for that?
I don't have too much to say for this. I think Forward March, as we'll probably have a pause in our discussion to just play some of it. It's just a track that I think ended up staying in my mind so much so that when we were talking about music for the Oscarinas this year, I was like, oh, that's the one. That's the one I know the title of because I looked it up, because it just kept getting stuck in my head when I was playing this game.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that really says something about it too, because Forward March is probably the most memorable track that stood out to me when I went through the score as well. So there's something here that I think is novel and interesting that's definitely, again, this is a huge underdog game, I think. It's a game that basically none of us had even heard of, and so I was really happy to see it get some attention. And it was, I gotta say, just a little bit of the background information. Anytime it came up in debates, there wasn't really a lot of pushback, because we were all like, well, I don't know anything about that, so I don't know how to counter it, so I'll just let it go.
Yeah, that is some of the difficulty, and I think, like, to just get into this a little bit before we leave you off with the Forward March, playing this game now is difficult. There's been rumors of a mobile port coming to fruition, but I have not seen anything beyond, like, a couple articles that came out in 2018 about the development of that.
Okay.
You can play it on your Super Nintendo, but sometimes your Super Nintendo just decides not to work for a while, which is what happened to me. And there's not a lot of copies of this out in the wild either. I think I had to go and find mine on eBay when I originally rebought this game as an adult. So it's a hard game to track down, which is a shame because it is a lot of fun, and the developers do seem to continue to have interest in supporting it if they can, but it seems like they're having a little bit of hard. It's the original developers that were working on the mobile port. I should clarify that.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
It's definitely a space that needs to be explored further, and I think the Oscarinas is a great fit for it when you kind of take a step back and realize how influential Lemmings was, and this being the game that took Lemmings and gave it a fresh skin, but also a more intriguing way to actually execute a lot of those ideas. Like, Lemmings is super, super bare bones, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's cool to see someone take that idea, run with it, and I gotta say, I hope we see it again in the future. Maybe they'll get around to finally doing a new King Arthur's World, or King Arthur's World 2, like 30 years later.
30 years later. That about concludes our thoughts on King Arthur's World. So thank you, folks, for joining me and Mitch tonight. As we said, King Arthur's World is available on the Super Nintendo and pretty much nowhere else. It's up for 3 awards. If you're a voter, I do hope you'll consider it. And if you're a viewer, let us know how you think it will perform. You can look forward to seeing all the winners at the awards ceremony this October.